Secunda Kamani reporting there. Well, one fascinating response to the events in France has been the reaction on Twitter. It's claimed that the hashtag Je suis Charlie was the most tweeted hashtag in Twitter history, as shown in this global heat map of Wednesday and Thursday's activity on the social network. Well, to discuss all this with me in the studio is Nabila Ramdani, a French-Algerian journalist and commentator, Julie Siddiqui, the former director of the Islamic Society of Britain, and the journalist and campaigner Ramona Ali. Well, we'll come on to talk more broadly about whether or not, as we heard in Secunda's report there, that as it were, the ridiculing of the Prophet brought this upon the people of Charlie Hebdo. But on the broader sense of that whole hashtag, would you feel comfortable with the hashtag Je suis Charlie?
I mean, I did, because I understood it in a very broad way and felt that it was really actually a very good way to show sort of solidarity with each other, really. I didn't see it as signing up to everything that the magazine stood for, and I don't think people did. You know, I've seen the cartoons, don't understand them, it's not my thing, but actually I think that hashtag wasn't about that. It was about saying, look, we stand with you, and this is absolutely horrific what has happened, and we all must, you know, stand in solidarity together. So that's what I felt the hashtag was.
Well, I think we're essentially talking about, you know, people who have been murdered in the most horrendous circumstances. There are no ifs and buts. You know, what happened was an evil massacre. And I think people are expressing, you know, their condemnation and for acts of terrorism carried out by fanatics, but also expressing their show of support and indeed perhaps solidarity for the victims at the other end in all sorts of ways. Taking to social media, people are praying in places of worships, either privately or publicly expressing themselves, attending vigils, taking to the streets. There are many different ways to show how affected you have been.
But it's interesting, Ramona, do you think that among British Muslims, some feel it is kind of necessary for them or incumbent to actually make a stand and say, this is, you know, we don't support this, we condemn it, as British Muslims rather than just as British?
Well, what happened in Paris was obviously reprehensible. It's absolutely disgusting what took place, and obviously any like-minded people would understand that and would condemn it. And I feel that, yeah, there is a moral duty for me to condemn it, but I'm worried about the wider question that, you know, should Muslims be compelled to condemn it? It's the compulsion factor that I have.
It's interesting, this idea that you feel then that British Muslims, in a way, some are compelled to make constant apology whenever there's an atrocity. A British Muslim has to, as it were, condemn it, to distance themselves from it.
Well, I think it's a question of political point scoring, where you are demonising an entire community of people. That's 1.5 billion Muslims around the world who are being compelled to condemn this.
As if they don't, as if
they wouldn't, yeah, like that silence would be complicity, exactly, for example, which is actually very damaging.
What do you make of the UKIP MEP that says there has to be some kind of, what he would like is some kind of sense of affirmation of peaceful values?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's beyond belief, really. I think these are the kind of things that we've just don't need right now. You know, we need good leadership, we need compassion, we need to come together, we need to stop polarising, you know, and I just feel, and I also saw a report earlier of an MP's assistant who tweeted something absolutely disgraceful last week, and, you know, I feel these things need to be outed and talked about, because this is not acceptable, really.
But on the question of the duality there, now we heard in that report there that actually people in a mosque today were saying actually the actions of Charlie Hebdo in drawing these cartoons have brought this upon them.
No, I mean, and I think, you know, look, this is difficult. These cartoons are very difficult for some people to understand. You know, as I said earlier, it's not my thing, it's not a lot of people's thing, and it's very difficult. You know, the Prophet Muhammad means a lot to Muslims and across the world, and to try and reconcile this, it's, you know, I think what was said there was how people feel, but it doesn't then mean that equals, yes, this was okay to do it. Of course, that's absolutely not the case, and has already been mentioned, you know, these people were not acting in defence of the Prophet. In fact, it was the exact opposite of that.
Let's turn to France now, because the impact on France is what we really want to talk about as well.
Well, I think, as you quite rightly said, I think what has happened, you know, there is no justification whatsoever for that, for violence under any circumstances. But there is no doubt that Muslims in France, and indeed around the world, have felt quite offended by the publications of Charlie Hebdo. And one has to point out to Charlie Hebdo's inconsistencies. You know, this is a publication that wants absolute freedom of expression as far as publication is concerned, while relentlessly campaigning to curb the freedoms of all sorts of groups, including Muslims.
Well, what do you mean in terms of wearing the niqab? Or what do you mean here?
In terms of the freedom to express their religious freedom, in terms of praying, in terms of the way they eat, the way they dress. And Charlie Hebdo has consistently been promoting the restriction of those freedoms. And it's very important to highlight that Charlie Hebdo is in many ways the reflection of French society, which is curbing the freedoms of Muslims while allowing the expression of hatred towards communities.
But I mean, I'm not talking for Charlie Hebdo, but I wouldn't think that they would be saying that they were actually trying to curb Muslims' ability to pray, to eat the way they wanted and so forth. But what do you say to the kind of the main religion in a way in France is secularism? Now, if you live in France, you sign up to that, especially in schools and in public places.
Well, secularism is the respect of the expression of all faiths. It's by no way stifling them. But let me tell you something. The White House in 2012 has come out to condemn Charlie Hebdo and to question its judgment for publishing these cartoons. It has called them deeply offensive and inflammatory. The Jewish Council also disapproved of the publication, saying that it was a form of irresponsible panache. But you have to listen to when people...
But presumably you would say that you cannot restrict and restrain people. You can say you disapprove of something, but you cannot act against it.
Well, what happened at the Charlie Hebdo offices were actually it's a triple hurt and attack to me as a journalist, as a Westerner and as a Muslim. So, and a lot of people are carrying this they're deeply upset about what happened in Paris, and I can't even imagine what it feels like for the families of the victims involved. But it's important, you know, religious expression, freedom of religious expression is important, freedom of expression in the press is also important, which I support as a journalist.
Thank you both very much indeed. I've just got time here for the papers, and tomorrow morning's Sun newspaper, that's for Charlie, that's the cops gunned down MAG assassins in shootout and jihadi power killed in hostage rescue battle. The Guardian, that awful picture there of at least one of the hostages coming out. We know, of course, that 4 others died and several others are critically injured in hospital. The bloody denouement, says The Guardian. The Telegraph, again, those dramatic pictures of the end of the siege at the Jewish supermarket. The Times, again, the bloody climax, a man running out with his child from the supermarket. And again, on the Independent, bloody end to Paris attacks as the police storm hostage sites. Well, that is all for tonight and indeed for this week. We leave the last word to those professional cartoonists from around the world who marked the lives and deaths of their colleagues at Charlie Hebdo in the most defiant fashion they knew how. Good night.